The iron tastes like blood where it presses against her lips. Claudia Severina is 26 years old, and she can feel the metal collar cutting into the soft flesh of her throat, can smell the ancient stone and fresh urine that defines these underground chambers. You can hear through the walls the rhythmic grunting of men training for death, while she waits to learn how she will be used before her own death arrives. She was, until 6 days ago, the daughter of Senator Marcus Claudius Severus, a woman raised in a villa overlooking the Bay of Naples, educated by Greek tutors, betrothed to a man whose family controlled half the olive trade in the western provinces. Now she kneels on damp stone in the hypogeum, the warren of cells and tunnels beneath the Flavian amphitheater, her silk stola exchanged for a rough shift that barely covers her body, her jeweled rings replaced by iron shackles that connect her wrists to the collar that marks her as property of the arena. Around her, in cells that stretch into darkness in both directions, other women wait in similar positions. Some weep, some pray. Some have gone silent in ways that suggest they have already departed from their bodies, leaving behind flesh that will serve whatever purposes the arena requires. A man approaches her cell. He is perhaps 30 years old, with the build of someone who has spent years perfecting the art of killing massive shoulders, scarred forearms, the particular grace of a trained fighter that makes every movement seem deliberate. His face is handsome in a brutal way, features that might have been attractive before they were broken and reset by combat. He wears the simple tunic of a gladiator, but the gold band on his arm marks him as a champion, one of the elite fighters whose victories have earned them privileges that common gladiators do not receive. He stops before her cell, his eyes moving over her body with the assessment of someone evaluating merchandise. "This is the senator's daughter?" he asks someone behind him. "Claudia Severina," a second voice confirms. "Condemned for poisoning her husband. The execution is scheduled for the Ludi Romani, 7 days from now." 7 days. The gladiator smiles, and the expression transforms his face into something predatory. "That's a long time. What's the assignment?" "Standard disposition. She's yours if you want her. The Lanista approved the transfer this morning." The gladiator, she needs to know his name, needs to understand who controls her fate steps closer to the bars. He reaches through, his fingers finding her chin, tilting her face upward so he can examine her more closely. "Quality," he says. "Not like the usual trash they send down here. This one was actually someone. She was engaged to Quintus Petronius, the shipping family. I know who Petronius is. I killed his cousin in the arena 3 years ago." The gladiator releases her chin. "What's your name, champion?" "I am Claudia Severina, daughter of—" "I know who your father was. I'm asking what you want to be called. Down here, who you were doesn't matter. Only who you're going to be for the next 7 days." She meets his eyes. She will not look away. She will not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear, even though fear is coiling in her stomach like something alive. "What is your name?" she asks instead of answering. The question surprises him. Condemned prisoners do not typically ask questions. They weep, they beg, they bargain, but they do not demand information from their captors, as if the exchange were between equals. "Titus alias Magnus," he says. "They call me Magnus the Destroyer. I have killed 47 men in this arena. I have never lost a fight, and for the next 7 days you belong to me." "I belong to no one." Magnus laughs. It is not a pleasant sound. "You belonged to your father until he sold you to Petronius. You belonged to Petronius until you killed him. Now you belong to the arena, and the arena has given you to me. That's how property works. It passes from hand to hand until it's used up. I did not kill my husband." "I don't care if you did or didn't. The courts say you did. That's why you're here instead of in your pretty villa." He turns to the guard behind him. "Open the cell. I'll take her to my quarters now. The guard produces keys. The cell door swings open. Magnus enters, his bulk filling the small space, his presence overwhelming in a way that makes the stone walls feel closer. You can walk with me, or I can drag you, he says. Walking is easier on both of us. Dragging is more fun for me. Choose. She chooses to walk. What you are about to learn has been systematically erased from the histories that celebrate Roman gladiatorial combat as spectacle and sport. The historians who documented the games focused on the fighters, their victories, their techniques, the crowds who cheered their triumphs. They recorded the construction of the great amphitheaters, the logistics of the beast hunts, the political purposes that the games served. They created a narrative of entertainment, of competition, of the Roman genius for organizing violence into manageable forms. But beneath every arena was a world they chose not to describe. The hypogeum, the underground chambers where animals, prisoners, and equipment were held before appearing on the sands above. A world of cells and cages, of holding areas and preparation rooms, of all the infrastructure required to produce the spectacles that Rome demanded. And in that world, condemned prisoners waited. Not just for their deaths, those were scheduled, predictable, the final moments of lives already forfeit, but for what happened in the days and weeks before those deaths, when they were property of the arena and available to anyone with sufficient authority to claim them. Tonight you will learn what happened in those underground chambers. You will learn about the gladiators, who earned the right to use condemned prisoners, the hierarchies that determined who received what privileges, the systematic availability of women who had been stripped of all legal protection. You will learn about Claudia Severina, who was condemned for a murder she did not commit, who found herself beneath the arena in the possession of a champion fighter, who spent 7 days navigating a world designed to destroy everything she was before her scheduled execution. Subscribe if you want to understand the full horror of Roman arena culture. Comment below telling me where you are watching from, because the gladiators above the sand were only part of the story. What happened below the sand, what happened to the women waiting in those cells, is what Rome's historians chose to forget. But before I tell you what Magnus did to Claudia in his quarters, what she witnessed in those underground chambers, and how she found a way to survive what should have been unsurvivable, I need to take you back. I need to explain how the hypogeum functioned, what condemned prisoners represented within its economy, and why gladiators were given access to women who were already sentenced to die. Because you cannot understand what Claudia faced without understanding the system that made her suffering useful. The hypogeum was a city beneath a city. Every major Roman arena had one, an underground complex that served as staging area, storage facility, and holding pen for everything the games required. The Flavian Amphitheater's hypogeum was the largest and most sophisticated, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that covered the entire footprint of the arena floor above. The infrastructure was impressive by any standard. Elevators, powered by human labor, could lift cages of animals or platforms of prisoners directly onto the sand through trapdoors that made them seem to appear from nowhere. Tunnels connected different sections, allowing animals and people to be moved without appearing in public until the moment of their debut. Storage rooms held costumes, weapons, scenery, all the props required for the theatrical executions that Roman crowds particularly enjoyed. But the hypogeum was more than infrastructure. It was a society with its own hierarchies, its own economy, its own rules, that did not quite match the rules of the world above. At the top of this society were the gladiators themselves. Not all gladiators, but the elite fighters whose victories had earned them status that their slave or criminal origins should have denied them. A champion like Magnus had more practical power within the hypogeum than most free citizens had anywhere. He ate better than the urban poor, lived in private quarters, commanded respect from guards and officials who technically outranked him, and he had access to condemned prisoners. This access was not officially sanctioned, No law specified that gladiators could use female prisoners awaiting execution. But the practice was universal, understood by everyone involved, woven into the fabric of arena culture so thoroughly that it was simply how things worked. The logic was straightforward. Condemned prisoners were dead already. Their executions were scheduled, their fates sealed. What happened to them before those executions was considered irrelevant to legal or moral concerns. They were property of the arena, to be disposed of as arena authorities saw fit. And arena authorities saw fit to reward successful gladiators with access to that property. The rewards served multiple purposes. They motivated gladiators to fight harder, to win more spectacularly, to provide the entertainment that justified the enormous expense of the games. They created loyalty among fighters who might otherwise resent their captivity. Even gladiators who were technically slaves or prisoners themselves had power over someone. And they disposed of a problem that arena administrators would otherwise have to manage: what to do with condemned prisoners during the days or weeks between their arrival and their scheduled deaths. Female prisoners were particularly valuable within this economy. Male prisoners might be given to gladiators for training purposes, targets to practice on, opponents who could not effectively fight back. But female prisoners served different functions. They provided sexual access, certainly, but also domestic service, entertainment, companionship, whatever the gladiator who claimed them desired. The arrangement was understood to be temporary. The women would die eventually, on schedule, in whatever manner had been assigned for their executions. But, until that scheduled moment, they belonged to whoever had claimed them, and what happened during that interim was no one's concern. This was the system that now controlled Claudia Severina. This was the world she was learning to navigate. This was the context within which she had 7 days to find a way to survive. Magnus's quarters were larger than she had expected, a suite of rooms rather than a single cell, with furniture that suggested comfort rather than mere utility. There was a bed with actual linens, a table with chairs, shelves holding what appeared to be books and personal items. It looked almost like a proper dwelling rather than a chamber in an underground prison. "Surprised?" Magnus asked, noting her examination. "Champions have privileges. I've won 47 fights. That buys better accommodations. It looks like a home. It is a home, the only home I've had since I was sold to the Ludus at 14. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We should talk before anything else happens." She sat, uncertain what to make of the invitation to converse. She had expected immediate assault, immediate demonstration of the power he held over her. Talk was unexpected. Magnus poured wine from a jug on the table, actual wine, not the watered vinegar that slaves received, and placed a cup before her. "You said you didn't kill your husband," he began. "Tell me about that. Why do you care?" "I don't, particularly, but I'm curious. You're not like the usual women they send down here. You have presence. You talk like you expect to be listened to. That suggests either you're stupid, which I don't think you are, or you believe you have something worth saying." Claudia studied him, trying to understand what he wanted. Information, perhaps. Leverage. Something he could use for purposes she could not yet identify. But talking was better than the alternative. Talking gave her time. "Quintus Petronius was my husband," she said. "Our marriage was arranged by our families for commercial purposes. My father's political connections for his family's shipping wealth. I did not love him, and he did not love me, but we were learning to work together. We had been married for 18 months. And then he died. He died at a dinner party. Poison in his wine. I was accused because I had been seen arguing with him earlier that day, because I had asked our cook about certain herbs for stomach complaints, because I was the convenient explanation for a death that someone wanted, explained quickly. Who wanted it explained? His brother Gaius, who inherited everything when Quintus died childless, who had been arguing with Quintus about the division of family assets for years, who was present at the dinner party where the poison was administered. You're saying the brother killed him and framed you. I'm saying I did not kill my husband, and the person who benefited most from his death is the person who accused me most loudly. She met Magnus's eyes. But I was tried by a court that was eager to dispose of the case, convicted on evidence that would not have satisfied a careful judge, and sentenced before I could properly prepare a defense. My father was not permitted to speak on my behalf. My witnesses were not called. The verdict was determined before the trial began, because the brother bribed the judges, because Gaius Petronius has powerful friends who wanted this resolved quickly and quietly. A widow condemned for murder is a simple story. A family scandal involving accusations of fratricide is complicated and damages everyone involved. Magnus was silent for a moment, processing what she had told him. None of that changes your situation, he said finally. You're still condemned. You're still going to die in 7 days. Knowing who actually killed your husband doesn't give you your life back. No, but knowing that I am innocent should affect how you treat me. Should it? Why? Because you are a killer by profession, but you are not a monster. You kill in the arena because that is what you were trained to do. But down here, in your quarters, you have choices. You can treat me as property to be used and discarded, or you can treat me as a person who has been wrongfully condemned. The facts are the same, only your response is different. You're appealing to my conscience. I'm appealing to whatever part of you is not merely a tool of the arena. You asked me to talk. You poured me wine instead of forcing me to the bed. You are not behaving like someone who sees me only as an object. I am asking you to continue not behaving that way. Magnus leaned back in his chair, a strange expression crossing his face. You know what happens to the women who come down here, he said. You know what I'm entitled to do. I know. And you're gambling that I won't do it because you asked nicely and told me a sad story about your wrongful conviction. I'm gambling that you are a more complicated person than the role you have been assigned. I'm gambling that 47 kills in the arena have not destroyed whatever capacity for choice you were born with. That's a significant gamble. I have nothing left to gamble except my dignity. I am going to die in 7 days regardless of what happens in this room. The only question is whether I die having preserved something of who I am, or whether I die having been reduced to nothing but a body used for your entertainment. A long silence. Magnus drank from his cup, his eyes never leaving her face. I've had probably 60 women pass through these quarters, he said. In 15 years of fighting, 60 women who were given to me as rewards or prizes or whatever they want to call it. Most of them cried. Some fought until they learned that fighting made things worse. A few tried to bargain with their bodies, offering enthusiasm in exchange for gentler treatment. None of them ever appealed to my conscience. Did it work? The crying, the fighting, the bargaining? No. They were going to die regardless. What happened before their deaths was irrelevant to their fates, but not to their experiences, not to who they were when they died. No, not to that. He stood, moved to the door of the quarters, and called for a guard. Bring bedding for a second pallet, he instructed when the guard appeared. The senator's daughter will sleep separately. The guard looked confused, but did not question a champion's orders. When he left, Magnus turned back to Claudia. You have your 7 days, he said. I won't touch you unless you ask, but understand this is not rescue. This is not salvation. This is just a pause. When the Ludi Romani arrive, you will be executed as scheduled. I cannot change that, and I would not if I could. You are condemned, and condemned prisoners die. I understand. Do you? Because some women in your position have mistaken temporary mercy for permanent protection. They have believed that if they were good enough, obedient enough, useful enough, they might earn a reprieve. They were wrong. The arena takes everyone eventually. It will take you, too. I understand, she repeated. I have 7 days. I intend to use them. Use them for what? She did not answer. She was still working out what she intended to use them for. The hypogeum at night was a different world than the hypogeum during the day. During daylight hours, filtered through grates and shafts that admitted thin beams of sun from the arena above the underground complex, hummed with activity. Gladiators trained in practice areas, their wooden swords clacking against posts and each other. Animals roared in their cages, kept hungry to ensure aggression when they finally reached the sand. Administrators moved through corridors with manifests and schedules, organizing the logistics of death on an industrial scale. But at night, when the activity ceased and the torches burned low, the hypogeum became something else. A space of shadows and whispers, of sounds that carried through stone walls, of things happening in cells and chambers that the daytime bustle drowned out. Claudia lay on her pallet in Magnus's quarters, listening to the sounds. She heard weeping from somewhere distant, a woman probably newly arrived, probably just beginning to understand what her condemnation meant in practice. She heard the lower sounds of men's voices, guards or gladiators, talking in tones too quiet to distinguish words. She heard, occasionally, other sounds rhythmic, urgent, unmistakable, that told her exactly what was happening in chambers not far from where she lay. The temporary mercy Magnus had granted her was not normal. She understood this with growing clarity. What was normal was what she was hearing through the walls. What was normal was women being used and discarded, their bodies available to anyone with sufficient authority, their experiences invisible to the histories that would record only their spectacular deaths. She was an exception. For reasons she did not fully understand, Magnus had chosen not to claim what the arena had given him. But exceptions were fragile. They depended on continuing goodwill, on not giving offense, on maintaining whatever calculation had produced the temporary reprieve. She needed to understand that calculation. She needed to understand Magnus, what he wanted, what he valued, what might sustain his unusual restraint for the remaining 6 days until her execution. And she needed to think about whether there was any possibility, any path, any chance at all of avoiding the death that waited for her at the end of those 6 days. Morning came with the sound of iron on stone guards walking their rounds, keys jangling, the daily machinery of the hypogeum resuming its operation. Magnus rose from his bed, dressed in his training tunic, and prepared to leave for whatever exercises champions performed to maintain their killing edge. "You'll stay here during the day," he told Claudia. "My quarters are private. No one enters without my permission. Food will be brought. If you need to relieve yourself, there's a pot in the corner room. Don't leave these chambers. What happens if I do? You become common property. My claim on you is personal, not official. If you're found wandering the hypogeum without my escort, you're available to anyone who wants you. The guards, the other gladiators, the administrators, anyone." "I understand." "Do you? Because the other gladiators are not like me. I've had my appetites satisfied many times over the years. I can afford to be patient, to make choices. The younger fighters, the ones who haven't earned their own quarters yet, they're hungry. They share cells, share everything. When a woman becomes available, they don't wait politely for their turn." The implication was clear. Magnus's quarters were sanctuary. Everything outside them was danger. "I will stay here," she said. He nodded and left. She heard the door close, heard his footsteps receding, heard the sounds of the hypogeum continuing around the small space that had become her prison within a prison. She was alone. For the first time since her arrest, she was alone with her thoughts, with time to think, with the opportunity to plan rather than merely react. She began by examining her surroundings. Magnus's quarters were comfortable, but not lavish, the suite of a successful man, not a wealthy one. The furniture was solid, but simple. The shelves held a few books surprising for a gladiator, whose profession did not typically require literacy in personal items that suggested years of accumulated existence. She looked at the books, Greek texts mostly, Philosophy Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. The writings of Stoics, the school of thought that taught acceptance of fate and the development of inner virtue regardless of external circumstances. Magnus was a gladiator who read philosophy, a killer who owned books about how to live a good life. The contradiction was strange, but it might also be useful. A man who valued Stoic teachings might respond to certain kinds of arguments that would be meaningless to someone governed purely by appetite. She continued her examination. In a drawer of the small desk, she found writing materials, papyrus, ink, a stylus. Not common items in the hypogeum, where prisoners were not expected to correspond with the outside world, but a champion might have purposes for writing that ordinary gladiators did not share. She also found something else. A key, small, iron, designed for a lock she could not identify. It was hidden beneath other items, tucked into a corner of the drawer as if Magnus did not want it easily discovered. A key to what? His quarters were not locked from the inside. She could leave whenever she chose, though his warnings had made clear the consequences. The key must be for something else. Something Magnus wanted to keep private even from people who might have legitimate access to his chambers. She memorized its location and continued her search, careful to leave everything exactly as she had found it. Magnus returned at midday, his body gleaming with the sweat of training, his demeanor suggesting the physical exertion had improved his mood. "You're still here," he observed. "You asked me to stay." "I told you to stay. Asking implies I would accept refusal." He went to the water basin and began washing the sweat from his face and arms. "How did you spend your morning?" "Thinking, examining my situation, trying to understand what options I might have." "You don't have options. You're condemned." "Everyone has options. Even the condemned. The question is whether the options lead anywhere useful." Magnus dried himself with a cloth and turned to face her. "What options have you identified?" "I could try to escape. The hypogeum has exits. I could try to find them, to slip out during some moment of confusion or distraction. I would probably be caught and killed immediately. But there is a chance, however small, of success. A very small chance. The exits are guarded. The tunnels are patrolled. And a woman in a prisoner's shift running through the streets of Rome would be recaptured within hours. I know. That option is unlikely to succeed. What else? I could try to appeal my conviction. 7 days is not long, but it might be enough for my father to reach someone with authority, to present evidence that was suppressed at my trial, to convince a magistrate that my execution should be delayed pending review. Your father has been trying that since your conviction. He has failed. The Petronius family has too many connections, and they do not want your case reopened." Claudia looked at him sharply. "You know about my father's efforts?" "I know many things. Champions hear news that ordinary gladiators do not. Your case has been discussed in the arena administration. There is concern that attempts to delay your execution might disrupt the Ludi Romani programming. The editor of the games has been promised a senator's daughter. He does not want that promise broken." The information was valuable. It confirmed what she had suspected, that her execution had become political, that powerful interests wanted her dead, not because she was guilty, but because her death served their purposes. "What other options?" Magnus asked. "I could accept my fate, spend my remaining days in whatever comfort is available, prepare myself spiritually for death, die with dignity when the time comes. That is what most prisoners do eventually, the ones who don't fight or bargain. They accept. I am not good at accepting things." "I noticed." Magnus sat across from her at the table, his posture suggesting genuine conversation rather than interrogation. "Is there an option you have not mentioned?" She studied him, trying to judge how much honesty was safe. "I could try to find allies," she said. "People who might help me for their own reasons. People who benefit from my survival, or who benefit from the embarrassment of those who want me dead. And who would those people be? I don't know yet. I am a stranger here. I don't understand the politics of the hypogeum, the relationships, the conflicts that might be exploited. I am operating with insufficient information. So you need information. Everyone needs information. The question is whether anyone is willing to provide it. Magnus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You are not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? A soft, noble woman, someone who would cry and beg and eventually accept whatever was done to her, someone who would be grateful for any mercy, any delay in the use she was destined for. I am grateful, but gratitude does not require me to stop thinking, does not require me to accept death when death might still be avoided. Death cannot be avoided. You are condemned. Sentences can be overturned. Executions can be delayed. Circumstances can change. I am not dead until I am dead, and until that moment, I will continue searching for alternatives. Magnus leaned forward. Let me tell you something about the hypogeum that you do not know. The editor of these games, the man who decides what happens on the sand, is named Gaius Publilius Commodus. He has been promised a spectacular execution for the Ludi Romani, a senator's daughter, condemned for husband, murder, destroyed in some appropriately dramatic fashion. He has already sold premium seats based on this promise. He has already boasted to other editors about the quality of his programming. I am not surprised, but here is what you do not know. Commodus has enemies, rivals who would like to see him embarrassed, who would benefit from the failure of his promised spectacle. And one of those rivals has been reaching out to people within the hypogeum, looking for ways to sabotage the Ludi Romani. Claudia felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but the possibility of hope. Who is this rival? His name is Sextus Aurelius Marcellus. He edits the games in Capua and has been seeking to replace Commodus here in Rome. If the Ludi Romani fail, if the promised spectacles do not occur, Marcellus's position improves. And Marcellus has been contacting people in the hypogeum? Marcellus has been contacting me. Magnus held her gaze steadily. He wants me to help sabotage the games. In exchange, he has promised to purchase my freedom, to buy me from the ludus, and manumit me as a free citizen. Why are you telling me this? Because your survival might serve his purposes. If the senator's daughter escapes, if Commodus's promised spectacle fails to occur, it damages Commodus and benefits Marcellus. Your escape could be part of a larger sabotage that earns me my freedom. You want to help me escape. I want to help myself. Your escape would be incidental to my purposes, but incidental benefit is still benefit. Claudia's mind was racing. This was the opportunity she had been searching for, an alignment of interests that made her survival valuable to someone with the power to accomplish it. What would the plan involve? I don't know yet. Marcellus has resources, money, connections, people who can facilitate escapes, but the details have not been worked out. He was waiting to see if I would agree to participate. And have you agreed? I have been considering. The risk is significant. If the sabotage is discovered, if I am implicated, my death will be far worse than anything I would face in the arena. Commodus would ensure that I suffered for as long as possible before dying. But the reward, freedom, is worth significant risk. It might be. I have been a gladiator for 15 years. I have killed 47 men. I have watched hundreds of others die. I have grown tired of this life, of the killing, of being property, no matter how many privileges I earn. Freedom would be worth almost any risk. Then why haven't you agreed? Magnus was silent for a long moment before answering. Because I don't trust Marcellus. He is using me for his purposes. When those purposes are served, he might decide that a gladiator who knows about his sabotage is too dangerous to leave alive. Freedom purchased from someone like him might prove to be very short. So, you need assurances, guarantees that Marcellus will honor his promises. I need leverage, something that protects me after the deed is done, something that makes it more dangerous for him to betray me than to honor our agreement. Claudia understood now. Magnus was not telling her this out of kindness or sympathy. He was telling her because she might be part of the solution to his problem. "I am a senator's daughter," she said slowly. "My father has political connections throughout Rome. If I survive, if I can reach him, if I can tell him what happened, those connections become available to protect anyone who helped me. A senator who could not protect his own daughter from wrongful conviction. A senator who was outmaneuvered by a specific family on a specific matter. That does not mean he has no power. It means his power was insufficient for that particular battle. Other battles might go differently. You're offering your father's protection in exchange for my help escaping. I'm offering an alignment of interests. You want leverage against Marcellus. I want to survive. My survival creates the leverage you need. A senator's daughter who owes her life to a gladiator, whose father owes a debt that cannot be measured in gold." Magnus considered this. She could see him weighing the proposition, calculating risks and rewards in the manner of someone who had survived 15 years in an arena by making accurate calculations. "It might work," he said finally. "It might be enough. Then we have an agreement?" "We have a conversation. Agreement comes later, after I've contacted Marcellus, after I've assessed what resources he can actually provide. But you have given me a reason to pursue that conversation. It was not commitment, it was possibility. But possibility was more than she had possessed that morning. "What do I do in the meantime?" she asked. "You wait. You stay in these quarters. You do not attract attention or create complications. And you think about whether there is anything else you can offer that would make this arrangement more attractive to everyone involved. Such as? Information about the Petronius family, about the brother who framed you. Anything that might be useful for leverage, for pressure, for complicating the lives of people who want you dead." She had such information. She had spent 18 months in the Petronius household, had observed Gaius's business dealings, had overheard conversations that were not meant for her ears. She had knowledge that could hurt him, if properly deployed. "I know things," she said. "Things that could damage Gaius Petronius severely. Evidence of illegal dealings, hidden debts, arrangements with people who would not want their association with him known. Then we have more to discuss, but not now. Tonight, when the hypogeum is quiet, we will talk about what you know and how it might be used." He rose, preparing to return to whatever afternoon activities champions engaged in. "Magnus," she said, stopping him at the door. "Yes? Why did you grant me mercy last night? Before you knew about Marcellus, before you understood how I might be useful, why did you choose not to claim what the arena gave you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you asked," he said. "No one ever asked before. They assumed what would happen and responded to that assumption. You asked me to be something other than what I was expected to be. And that was enough?" "That, and the philosophy books. The Stoics teach that we should not be controlled by external circumstances. That virtue comes from internal choice. I have killed 47 men because the arena demanded it. But in my quarters, when no one is watching, I have the ability to choose differently. You gave me a reason to exercise that ability." He left. Claudia sat in the quiet of his chambers, thinking about what she had learned, about what might be possible, about the strange alignment of interests that might save her life. The next 3 days established a pattern that Claudia learned to navigate. During the days, she remained in Magnus's quarters, avoiding the hypogeum's common areas, maintaining the invisibility that kept her safe from other gladiators who would not share Magnus's restraint. She read from his philosophy books, finding in the Stoics' teachings a framework for understanding her situation, the distinction between things she could control and things she could not. The importance of maintaining internal virtue regardless of external circumstances. During the evenings, when Magnus returned from training, they talked. She told him about the Petronius family, about Gaius's secret debts to moneylenders who charged illegal interest rates, about his arrangements with ship captains to smuggle goods past customs collectors, about his affairs with married women whose husbands would be very interested to learn about them. Magnus shared what he had learned from his contacts. Marcellus was interested in the expanded proposal. The senator's daughter's survival added value to the sabotage, not just embarrassment for Commodus, but potential future leverage through the grateful senator. Resources were being arranged. A plan was taking shape. The escape would happen during the Ludi Romani itself, Magnus explained on the fourth night. The games create chaos, thousands of people moving, security stretched thin, attention focused on the arena floor. There are moments when the hypogeum is nearly empty, when everyone who can be is watching the spectacles above. But I'm scheduled to be part of those spectacles. You're scheduled for the afternoon program. The escape would happen during the morning events, before your execution is called. You would be removed from your cell and smuggled out through the service tunnels while everyone is watching the beast hunts. And what happens to you? I fight in the afternoon program as usual. There's a paired combat scheduled me against a fighter from the Ludus Magnus. When I win, I'll be celebrated as always. No one will connect me to your disappearance. But if the sabotage is discovered afterward, there will be other elements to the sabotage. Equipment that fails, animals that escape at wrong moments, disruptions that create chaos. My involvement will be one small part of a larger plan. The investigation will have many suspects. It was risky. There were countless ways the plan could fail detection during the escape, capture afterward, betrayal by Marcellus or someone in his network. But the alternative was certain death. I will do it, she said. There are things you must do to prepare. Information about the Petronius family must be documented, written down, sealed, left with someone who can release it if things go wrong. Your testimony about your wrongful conviction must be prepared, ready to present to your father and through him to magistrates who might reopen your case. You want insurance. I want everyone involved to understand that betraying this arrangement has consequences. If Marcellus abandons me after the sabotage, your father releases information that damages him. If your father fails to protect me after your escape, I release information that damages the Petronii. Everyone is invested in everyone else's success. Mutual assured destruction. Mutual assured protection. The language is different, but the structure is the same. She spent the fifth day writing. The documents Magnus had provided became vehicles for everything she knew about the Petronii, about her trial, about the corruption that had produced her condemnation. She wrote clearly, precisely, with the attention to evidence that her brief trial had not permitted. When she finished, she had a record that could destroy Gaius Petronius's reputation and business, could prompt investigations that would uncover crimes far more serious than husband murder, could shift the narrative from guilty widow to victim of powerful men's schemes. Magnus reviewed the documents, his expression suggesting approval. This is substantial, he said. If this reaches the right people, the Petronii will spend years defending themselves. It is the truth. Everything I have written can be verified by witnesses, by records, by evidence that exists but was never examined during my trial. Truth matters less than perception, but evidence that can be verified that matters quite a lot. He sealed the documents in a container that he locked with the small key Claudia had discovered days earlier. She understood now what the key was, for Magnus had been preparing for this kind of arrangement long before she arrived, had been building systems to protect himself from the betrayals that were endemic to his world. The documents will be held by someone outside the arena, Magnus explained. A freedman I trust who owes me his life and his livelihood. If the plan succeeds, the documents remain sealed. If anyone betrays anyone else, they are opened and distributed. And my father? How does he fit into this system? A message has been sent through Marcellus's network. Your father knows that an escape is being planned, that his support after the fact will be required, that there are consequences for failing to provide that support. He has agreed to the terms. You've been in contact with my father? Marcellus has been in contact with your father, through intermediaries, at a distance, with sufficient deniability for everyone involved. but the agreement exists. Your father will protect me. Marcellus will honor his promise, and you will survive to ensure that everyone keeps their commitments." It was more than she had dared hope for, a network of mutual obligation, binding multiple parties to each other's success, creating a structure that made betrayal dangerous for everyone. "2 more days," Magnus said. "Can you maintain your composure for 2 more days?" "I have maintained composure through worse than waiting." "I believe you have." On the 6th night, everything changed. Claudia was alone in Magnus's quarters when the door opened. She expected Magnus, returning from whatever evening activities occupied Champion's time. Instead, she found herself facing a man she did not recognize, older, heavy, wearing the tunic of an arena administrator. "Claudia Severina," the man said. "The senator's daughter. I am Gaius Publilius Commodus, editor of the Ludi Romani." She felt cold terror wash through her, but forced her expression to remain neutral. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know that your fate is in my hands. The manner of your execution, the circumstances of your death, these are my decisions to make." He stepped into the quarters, his presence filling the space that had been sanctuary. "You also know, I suspect, that there are people who would prefer that your execution not occur." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Commodus smiled without warmth. "You have spent 6 days in a champion's quarters without being touched. That is unusual. Champions typically take what they are given. Magnus's restraint suggests that he has purposes for you beyond the obvious. Magnus has been kind, that is all. Magnus has been plotting. That is different from kindness." Commodus moved closer, his eyes examining her with the assessment of someone who understood exactly how much value she represented. "I have been aware of Sextus Aurelius Marcellus's sabotage plans for some time. Did you think I would not have agents watching my rivals, monitoring their networks, identifying their contacts within my arena?" The cold terror intensified. If Commodus knew about the sabotage— "There is no sabotage," she said, attempting to maintain the pretense. "There is very much sabotage, planned for tomorrow's games, involving multiple elements designed to embarrass me and destroy my reputation. Your escape was to be one of those elements, the promised senator's daughter, vanishing before she could be executed, making me appear incompetent to control my own hypogeum. I know nothing about this. You are a poor liar, but it does not matter whether you confess. I know the plan, I know the participants, and I have made arrangements to ensure that the sabotage fails spectacularly." He reached into his tunic and removed a document, a scroll that he unrolled and held before her face. "This is Magnus's signed confession. He was arrested an hour ago, questioned thoroughly, and persuaded to provide a complete account of Marcellus's conspiracy. His execution will occur tomorrow morning, before the games begin. A warning to anyone else who might consider treachery." Magnus was arrested. The plan was exposed. Everything she had built over 6 days had collapsed. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Want? I want what I have always wanted, a successful games, a spectacular execution, the continuation of my career and reputation. Your survival was never part of my plans. Your death, however, can be modified, made more elaborate than originally intended. You're going to torture me. I am going to make an example. The senator's daughter, who conspired with saboteurs, who plotted against the games, who attempted to escape the justice she deserved. Your death will be slow, public, educational. Every person in the arena will understand what happens to those who defy the authority of the games." He rolled the document and returned it to his tunic. "You have tonight to contemplate what is coming. Tomorrow you will be brought to the arena and prepared for an execution that Rome will remember for generations." He turned and left. Guards appeared to take up positions outside the door, not Magnus's quarters anymore, but a prison cell that happened to contain comfortable furniture. She was alone, The plan had failed. Magnus was arrested. Tomorrow, she would die in ways she had not previously imagined. I need to tell you something about what happened next, because the historical sources for this period are fragmentary, and the account that survives does not fully explain how Claudia Severina escaped the fate that Commodus had planned for her. What we know is that the Ludi Romani of that year were disrupted, not by the sabotage that Marcellus had planned. That conspiracy had been exposed and neutralized, but by events that no one had anticipated. What we know is that Claudia Severina survived. She appeared in Rome weeks later, in the company of her father, with documents that prompted investigations into the Petronius family's business dealings. Gaius Petronius was eventually convicted of multiple crimes unrelated to his brother's murder. The original conviction of Claudia for husband murder was not formally overturned, but her execution was never carried out, and she lived for many years afterward in quiet retirement. What we know is that Magnus the Destroyer fought his last battle on the day of the Ludi Romani, not in the paired combat he had been scheduled for, but in a different context, against different opponents, with a different outcome than anyone had expected. The sources do not explain the connection between these events. They do not tell us how a condemned woman in a locked cell escaped an arena that was supposed to be impossible to escape. They do not tell us how an arrested gladiator freed himself in time to change the course of events. But I can tell you what I believe happened, based on the fragments and the logic of the situation. Claudia did not sleep that night. She spent the hours thinking not about escape, which seemed impossible, but about Magnus's philosophy books, about the Stoic teachings that had shaped his unexpected mercy, about the distinction between things one could control and things one could not. She could not control Commodus. She could not control the guards outside the door. She could not control the fate that waited for her in the arena. But she could control her response. She could control how she faced what was coming. She could control whether she died as a victim, passive and broken, or as someone who had fought until fighting was impossible. And she could think about the small details that might not be as fixed as they appeared. Magnus had been arrested. But arrested did not mean dead, not yet. Commodus had said the execution would be tomorrow morning, before the games begin. That meant Magnus was still alive, somewhere in the hypogeum, waiting for his own death. The documents had been taken from Magnus when he was arrested, but the sealed container, the insurance documents about the Petronius family, had been hidden elsewhere, with the freedman Magnus trusted. That evidence still existed. That leverage was still available. And Commodus, for all his certainty, had made an assumption that might be wrong. He had assumed that the sabotage conspiracy was entirely neutralized, that every participant had been identified, that nothing remained except to clean up the final details. But Marcellus had resources that Commodus might not fully understand, networks that extended beyond the people who had been arrested, capabilities that might still be deployed, even with the original plan exposed. Claudia did not know what those capabilities might be. She did not know how they might be activated. But she knew that giving up meant certain death, and that fighting, even fighting with uncertain weapons, meant at least the possibility of something different. She began to plan. The door opened at dawn. Guards entered to take her to the arena. She went with them willingly, saving her strength, maintaining the appearance of submission while her mind continued working on possibilities. The route from Magnus's former quarters to the arena floor passed through corridors she had not seen during her days in hiding. She observed everything: the layout of the tunnels, the positions of guards, the locations of exits that might lead to the surface. She also observed something else. The hypogeum was not operating normally. There were fewer guards than she expected, fewer administrators, fewer of the people who should have been preparing for the day's games. Something had happened during the night, something that was disrupting the usual routines. Her guards did not explain. They simply moved her through the corridors eventually delivering her to a preparation area where condemned prisoners were held before their appearances on the sand. She was not alone. Other prisoners waited in cells around her criminals, prisoners of war, people whose deaths would provide the entertainment that Rome demanded. Some were scheduled for beast hunts, some for mass executions, some for individual spectacles designed to satisfy particular crowd preferences. In one of the cells, she saw Magnus. He was beaten. His face bore the marks of the thorough questioning Commodus had referenced. One eye was swollen shut. His arms were bound behind him in a way that suggested the guards expected him to fight, even in his damaged condition. But he was alive, and when his remaining eye met hers across the preparation area, she saw something that was not defeat. She saw calculation. A guard approached her cell, unlocking the door to bring her to whatever preparation was required before her execution. At that moment, several things happened simultaneously. An explosion echoed through the hypogeum, something igniting in the storage areas where the game's equipment was kept. Guards and administrators began running toward the sound, their attention pulled away from the prisoners. Magnus moved. Despite his bonds, despite his injuries, he launched himself at the guards nearest his cell with a violence that seemed impossible for someone in his condition. 2 men went down before anyone understood what was happening, and the door to Claudia's cell swung open, not because a guard had unlocked it, but because the lock had been compromised somehow, weakened during the night by someone who had anticipated this moment. She ran. The chaos in the hypogeum was not accidental. The explosion was not random. Marcellus's sabotage had not been fully neutralized. It had been modified, adapted, deployed in ways that Commodus had not anticipated. Guards pursued her through tunnels that she did not know. But other people were moving through those tunnels too. People who knew the routes, who understood the layout, who were creating diversions and obstacles that slowed her pursuers. She reached a service exit, a gate that should have been locked, but that stood open, held by a man she did not recognize. "Senator's daughter?" he asked. "Yes. Marcellus sends his regards. This way." She followed him through the gate, upstairs that led to the surface, into the blinding light of a Roman morning. The Flavian amphitheater rose behind her, sounds of chaos still echoing from within. Ahead of her was a cart, a driver, a route out of the city that had been prepared for exactly this contingency. "Magnus," she said. "The gladiator. He needs—" "The gladiator is making his own exit. Different route, different arrangements. He will be free by nightfall, if all goes according to plan." "How is this possible?" Commodus said he had neutralized the sabotage. Commodus neutralized the sabotage he knew about. Marcellus is a careful man. He always has backup plans. She climbed into the cart. The driver urged the horses forward. Rome began to recede behind her, the city where she had been condemned, where she had been imprisoned, where she had somehow found allies in the most unlikely places. She was free. The aftermath unfolded over weeks and months rather than days. Claudia reached her father's villa and immediately began the process of exposing the Petronius family's crimes. The documents Magnus had prepared proved devastating financial irregularities, smuggling operations, affairs with married women whose husbands were powerful men. Gaius Petronius found himself facing investigations on multiple fronts, his resources consumed by legal battles, his reputation destroyed by revelations that had nothing to do with his brother's murder. The murder itself was eventually traced to a slave in the Petronius household, a man who had been bribed by Gaius to poison Quintus's wine, who confessed under questioning, who provided testimony that made Claudia's wrongful conviction undeniable. The magistrates who had rushed her trial were quietly removed from their positions. The Petronius family's influence in the courts was broken. Magnus survived his escape from the hypogeum. He killed 4 guards during his exit, adding to the 47 deaths he had already accumulated, but he reached the extraction point that Marcellus had arranged. His freedom was purchased as promised, his manumission documented and legal, his future as a free citizen of Rome secured. Commodus was destroyed by the chaos of the Ludi Romani. The explosion, the escapes, the multiple failures of security that the games revealed, these were blamed on his incompetence, his arrogance, his failure to maintain proper control of his domain. Marcellus replaced him as editor of the Roman games within the year. The mutual protection arrangement that Magnus had designed proved effective. Everyone who had participated in Claudia's escape had leverage over everyone else. Everyone was invested in everyone else's success. No one betrayed anyone, because betrayal would have been more costly than loyalty. Claudia lived for another 34 years after her escape from the arena. She never married again. Her experience with Quintus Petronius had cured her of any desire for the institution. She lived quietly on her father's estates, managing properties after his death, eventually becoming known as a woman of intelligence and capability who had survived experiences that would have destroyed most people. She maintained correspondence with Magnus, who had settled in the eastern provinces, far from the arenas where he had killed and nearly been killed. Their letters discussed philosophy, mostly the Stoic teachings that had shaped both their responses to impossible circumstances. They never met again in person, but the connection forged in the hypogeum persisted across distance and years. She also wrote her account of what had happened. Not immediately, the wounds were too fresh, the danger of exposure too real, while Commodus's allies still held positions of power. But eventually, when enough time had passed and enough people had died, she recorded everything. The arrest, the condemnation, the journey to the hypogeum, Magnus's unexpected mercy, and the alliance that had saved her, the escape, the sabotage, the network of mutual protection that had bound everyone together. The account was preserved in her family's archives, copied by scribes across generations, eventually reaching modern scholars who study the Roman arena's hidden histories. This is how we know what gladiators did to female prisoners beneath the arena, not through official sources, which recorded only the spectacles on the sand, but through the testimony of a woman who was meant to be one of those spectacles and who survived to tell the truth. Remember Claudia Severina. Remember the senator's daughter who knelt in a hypogeum cell, condemned for a murder she did not commit, waiting for a death that was supposed to be certain. Remember Magnus the Destroyer, the gladiator who read philosophy and chose mercy when mercy was not required, who built an alliance with a condemned woman because she asked him to be something other than what the arena expected. Remember the hypogeum itself, the world beneath the sand, the infrastructure of death that made Rome's spectacles possible, the systematic availability of condemned women to anyone with sufficient authority to claim them. Remember that the histories we inherit are incomplete. The historians who documented Rome's gladiatorial games focused on the fighters and the spectacles, on the blood and the glory, on the political purposes that the violence served. They did not document what happened in the cells beneath the arena, what condemned prisoners experienced before their deaths, what the system actually looked like from the perspective of its victims. Remember that survival in impossible situations requires both intelligence and alliance. Claudia survived not through strength or wealth or powerful connections. All of those had failed her. She survived by identifying people whose interests aligned with hers, by building networks of mutual obligation that made everyone's survival dependent on everyone else's. Remember that the condemned are not powerless. They possess knowledge, capability, the capacity to make choices that affect outcomes. Even facing certain death, Claudia found options that were not apparent when she first entered the hypogeum. She created possibilities that did not exist until she created them. Remember what gladiators did to female prisoners beneath the arena. Remember that what happened there was horrific, systematic, routine, invisible to the histories that preferred not to see it. Remember the 60 women who passed through Magnus's quarters before Claudia, the countless others who passed through other gladiators' cells. the bodies used and discarded because they were already condemned and their experiences did not matter. Remember that Claudia was exceptional. Most women in her situation did not escape. Most were destroyed as planned, their deaths entertaining crowds who never knew or cared what had happened before those deaths. Most left no testimony, no record, no evidence that they had ever existed, except as entries in arena manifests listing the day's executions. Remember them all, the ones who survived and the ones who did not, the exceptions who found ways out and the rule who found only death. Remember that the arena consumed them, that Rome's entertainment required their suffering, that what we know is only a fraction of what actually occurred. Subscribe if you want more hidden histories revealed. Comment below telling me where you are watching from. Share this video with anyone who thinks they understand Roman gladiatorial culture from movies and documentaries that focus only on the fighters. Because the fighters were only part of the story. The spectacles were only part of the story. The real story, the one that Rome's historians preferred not to tell, is what happened beneath the sand, in the cells and chambers where condemned prisoners waited for death and experienced things that were often worse than the death that followed. Remember the hypogeum. Remember the condemned. Remember Claudia Severina. Remember